All right. I believe we are go. Are we go?
I think we are.
I'm waiting for a sign. We are a go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Full Circle, the Corsace podcast. I am once again your host, T1G, and joining me for a very exciting episode that I think should be a lot of fun today are going to start off with Dio and iFlame. So we will say hello to Dio and iFlame. Good morning, gentlemen. How are we doing today? Talk a little about yourselves very briefly, please.
Good morning. I'm Dio. I do commentary stuff. I do a lot of other tournament stuff, GMT, perennial tournament committee, etc., etc. Lots of tournament stuff.
There you go. I'm iFlame. Do mostly commentary, Corsace, various other tournaments. My building finally turned the AC on, so that's been a joy. But otherwise, things are going well. And I always love when we get to the kind of interview portion of the episodes and get to interview a few of the players.
Yeah, absolutely. Very excited for today. So as iFlame said, first we are going to touch on last week's match in Corsace Close, the losers final. Then we have very special guests, Enry and Miles, who we'll be introducing just a little bit later on to get them in for some discussions on some very fun topics, I am sure. But yeah, so we are going to start off today with the one and only match from last weekend. Unfortunately, the reschedule split up our grand finals weekend. So we're going to go losers final of Corsace Close, which was the rematch between Enry, and that is these are going to be weird clips because we had a little technical difficulty, but it was Enry versus Malashevsky, of course, in that losers bracket final matchup we've seen a lot in the past, and Malashevsky looking for revenge, as it were, against Enry, who defeated him in winners semis. And well, unfortunately for Enry, Malashevsky did indeed get his revenge.
He certainly did. I think the outcome of this match was pretty much as expected to most people, but the match itself, how it played out, maybe not necessarily as you would expect. We had Malice banning out the DT1, DT3, fairly expected. Hidden Hard Rock 1 bans for Enry were interesting, I guess. Was not feeling super confident on the aim. I was a little bit surprised they didn't want to ban out one of the more technical picks, but opted not to. But Enry actually started off beating Malice on the No Mod 4, winning by about 70k. That was very impressive, something not many players have been able to do. Then followed it up with a No Mod 5 win on the speed, which we were expecting to go for a 2-0 lead, and then unfortunately that is where things fell apart, and Malashevsky took the next 7 points. I think the other unexpected thing was the DT2. Malashevsky won that by 50k. I think that's one we were expecting Enry to take, along with potentially the DT4, but I thought overall, even after the first 2 points from Enry, a lot of the picks were incredibly close, right? You had 50k on the DT2, 50k on the No Mod 1. Otherwise, the first 5 wins for Malashevsky were all 100,000 points or less. And then the last 2 points were a bit rougher, but despite the scoreline, it was actually a relatively close match in terms of score. I also have to shout out 900k on DT4 is just absolutely insane from Malashevsky. Yeah. That is an absurd score.
I think the biggest surprises in this match were the DT2 and the No Mod 4, though. I mean, you just never expect Enry to win the No Mod 4, particularly against Malashevsky. Against a lot of other players, I think you can expect it, but against Malashevsky, I think that's a really unexpected win, which was a cool start to the match. But then the DT2 win for Malashevsky is also unexpected. Like, it was a 5% AC difference in favor of Enry, and he still lost because 1300 combo game from Malashevsky, basically. So that was kind of rough, and I feel like that was the big turning point when, like, you lose that DT2 as Enry. I feel like a lot of the rest of the match feels much harder to win because of that, right? The early breakpoint is one thing, but losing a breakpoint there, I think, is really, really tough to deal with. Because as we saw in the rest of the match, a lot of the other maps are very contested. I mean, you've got wins by, 70k, less than 100k on the Hard Rock 2, 70k on the Hidden 2, 50k thereabouts on the No Mod 1, right? So there's a lot of maps in this pool that were very closely contested, and losing a pick like that on paper you're supposed to win just makes the rest of it that much harder to deal with.
Yeah, we went into this, I think, expecting a lot of things to be very, very contested, and we were certainly not disappointed. With the bare exception of the DT4, which Malashevsky put up, like you're not going to see many scores like that. And then the Nomad 6 as well kind of fell apart a little bit for Enry there on that last pick, but yeah, it was just like you said, it puts you in such a tough space, and in a matchup where you know you're as favored as Enry is against pretty much everyone on late round speed. Yeah, that DT2 loss was really tragic, and it's so crazy to look at too because it's all wrapped up in the combo. Like I mean, it's a 5% accuracy diff. This map right here is why I actually unironically think speed maps in pools, so like Nomad 5 DT2 DT3 should just be ACK WinCon. Like, I'm sorry. I feel like Enry deserved better, winning at 94.94 to 89.84 AC.
Yeah, I mean that's what a lot of speed tournaments will do, right? They'll just straight up make it an ACK win con for the whole tournament.
Yeah.
But I mean, we got to give Enry his props, and obviously we'll be discussing this, in the interview. But like, the guy has done a very good job in this tournament overall. Getting up to the third place finish, like beat players that he was, expected to beat, and also got the big win over Malashevsky and winners. So, I gotta say, like, good job, and congrats to him on the top 3 finish, even if that losers final didn't go exactly how he maybe wanted it to. And I do, we did the discussion last week, of course, the long form predictions segment on the grand final. We discussed both possible grand finals that we might end up seeing. Now that we know we are going to have Malashevsky facing off against worst HR player, the first time they will have ever played in a 1v1 pot. For all I know, it could be the first time they've ever played in a tournament. I don't know. Did Poland play South Korea last year? I don't know.
I think they played in SSOT against
maybe in
each other.
SSOT. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
They've played in a couple tournaments, but first 1v1
yeah,
for sure.
Never played in a 1v1, and I mean, obviously Forum doesn't play very many 1v1s to begin with. Anything we take away from the losers final to consider in the grand final, like based on how Malashevsky performed, what we might expect out of him in a matchup where Forum is coming in with a little bit of information on, his opponent's picks and performances?
I mean, I think the obvious one, DT4, probably a must ban, but that obviously would leave one of the speed picks open, the DT2 or the Nomad 5. So I think one of those 3 is just a guaranteed point for Malashevsky. But honestly, I think a lot of the other scores from Malashevsky were strong, but not unbeatable, right? Forum, it feels like, has a good shot on quite a few of these maps and should be able to put up a fight in my mind.
I think Forum is leaving open the Nomad 5, bro. I don't think he's worried about that one. That was
he's just double tapping, dude.
That was straight up 100k from Malashevsky.
Yeah, 100k, bro.
All respect on the other speed maps, but not that one. That one's quite doable. DT3, Nomad 5 are being left up in that match. Yeah, the DT2 and the DT4 I think are banned, but
are we getting the 85% FC?
Bring back Ascension to Heaven. Let me see it again. I think the rest of the match is going to be really interesting, though. Like, what the bans are for Malashevsky, I think, is an interesting thing to think about, because there weren't any maps where he was like completely ineffective in this match, right? Like the Nomad 4, I think you can probably chalk up to a low roll. He said he bottomed locals on that maps.
Yeah.
Maybe he bans the Nomad 5. I don't know. But I think a lot of the rest of the pool is tons and tons of toss-ups between these two players, and that's going to make this match really fun to watch.
Yeah, and that's basically, I think, what we decided when we discussed last week, right, was almost this entire pool in that particular matchup is just toss-up maps, because they're, other than tapping, there's really nothing that is 100%, I feel, favored either way. So let's say, if we're putting ourselves back on this spot here real quick, because we have kind of the time to allow for it. I know I picked Malashevsky in our predictions last week. I'm going to stick with that. I think it's going to be quite close, but I think these scores are, good enough to win but not good enough to win easily. It'll be a dogfight, but I still think Malashevsky wins. Either of you guys have any different takes?
I mean, I completely agree. As my take last week, I thought Malashevsky would take it. I thought it would be close. I don't think this match has really done anything to change that. I feel like the only surprising score was that DT4. So sure, one free point there, but I think everything else should be fairly close. And so I don't think there's much difference for me.
Here's how worst HR player can still win. I mean, I have to, right? If both of you are going,
you gotta do it. He is a real one.
I mean, I think a lot of the maps are. I think some of this pool is favored Malashevsky, and some of this pool is favored worst HR player, and I think it's a relatively close matchup. And in those relatively close matchups, I tend to favor the player or team in winners, right? Like, if you think it's actually
they have more margin for error.
Them, yeah, they just have more margin for error. There's more information's overrated, but like you get more room for error within the match, whereas Malashevsky's picks have to be good, bans have to be good both times in both sets, and has to win both of them. So I think in a matchup like this, where you think it's going to be close, hedging on the winner's side of the bracket is usually correct. You don't normally root or vote against Malashevsky in 1v1s, but we've seen him be beaten before by Emrek, and maybe it happens again this year. I think regardless of outcome, it's going to be an awesome match, but I do think that with winner's side advantage, there's a better chance Forum wins than I would usually say in just a straight up 1v1. Like, if this were winners finals, I think I would probably bet Malashevsky, but with the winner side advantage in grands, I kind of lean worst HR player, just because there's good picks for both sides, and there's, more margin for error.
I could definitely see it. I mean, I think the one thing to remember is that even though most of us, I think, have voted for Malashevsky, if we all think that it's 55-45 in favor of Malashevsky, you're going to get 5 predictions for Malashevsky. So it's easy to look very one-sided in post predictions, just looking at the predictions themselves. But in actuality, I think this is true for a lot of matches, but this one as well. We do generally agree that they are going to be very close. Like, I mean, I would probably favor Malashevsky 60%.
Basically, nobody's predicting a 7-0, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
It's going to be almost assuredly. It's going to be very close.
Yeah,
but I'm excited. That match, as you may or may not know, 13 UTC tomorrow morning. Going to be me, Dio, and Vorty on the cast for that one. So for all the North American, South Americans, we'll be seeing you guys hopefully bright and early for that one. If you're on the West Coast, sorry about
dark and early.
Yeah, dark and early, because that is that's 6 a.m. Sorry.
Yeah,
but such is life. But I think it's going to be a good one. I would love to see just back-to-back tiebreaker sets, just some crazy stuff, like another nuts score like Forum set in OWC Grand Finals or something along those lines. But very, very excited for that one. We'll remind you guys of the time again once we get to the end of the show. But that is, I think, about all there is to cover with that particular pair of matches. And we're coming down to the end of the tournament here. It's always a little sad, but hopefully people are still adequately hyped even with the split weekends Grand Finals. Because Corsairs Closed rarely fails to deliver in the Grand Finals. We've had pretty good matchups, I think, every year in Grands so far. So hopefully one more of those to come. As for now, we're going to say a brief thank you to Dio, who will be taking his leave for a little bit before coming back. And we are going to welcome in our first guest of the day for his interview. Everybody, give a warm welcome to Enry. Good evening, Enry. Thank you for being here today.
Welcome.
And welcome to the show. So this is going to be a little bit about Enry himself, a little bit about Corsairs Closed and the future. And so, I think Enry, a guy at this point, you are not one who needs much introduction. But for those who might not be as familiar, can you give us just a little background, what you've done and kind of how you got into tournaments and reached this point?
Okay. I mean, most people know I play tourneys for fun and like play in a lot of super teams, but I got into tournaments because I watched a friend of mine. We weren't close back then, but Taquito, I watched the score of his on this cool tech map, and then I realized he played tournaments, and it kind of revived my interest because I watched OWC for a bit when I was like really young, but I could never really understand what was going on because I was like a new player. Yeah.
I feel like it's always interesting the like entry point for tournaments because I'm old enough and have been around long enough that I was the generation that got into tournaments from like OWC 2015, being American and
Yeah.
having that happen. So it's always interesting hearing, kind of from other eras a little bit. So obviously, you named Taquito there as a reason you got into tournaments. Any other sort of tournament inspirations that you looked up to or, kind of learned from in your time ascending the ranks to the top of the tournament scene?
I mean, obviously we have Malashevsky because he has like this huge dominance over this tournament scene.
Sure.
He is one of the very few people I'm intimidated by with like closed. I was like genuinely nervous more than anything going against him. So, there's also some people from Rubber Conquest, specifically Digital Hypno and Apraxia, were some people that I watched when I was like pretty new to the game, and they would maybe enjoy tournaments in the first place because they were pretty funny and also really good.
That era was so much fun. I don't know iFlame how much you were around back then, if at all, but
Yeah, really only for the tail end of it. So I watched them play the OWCs and they dominated those. I mean, it was a fun team to watch, but I didn't see their other tournaments much, unfortunately. So a little before my time.
Dang. Yeah, Rubber Conquest was like not the OG super team because you can go back farther than that, but they really made a name for themselves. I can see like that sort of dominance and that sort of skill set variety and everything could really lead you to wanting to get into tournaments and wanting to, be on a team like that, be in a group like that because they were super close knit and everything. And then, kind of lastly for the little intro background here, you've won a bunch of stuff, had a bunch of great results over the past year or two, from the 1v1s, like getting third place in closed 2023, 2024, third place in MREC Cup, helping take Philippines to top 6 in OWC, and then winning back-to-back Course Ace Opens 2022, 2023. Any of those, enri, that you would say like, this is my proudest achievement, this is my crowning glory, or anything else that I didn't list among those?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot, so I'm just gonna sum it up to the fact that every achievement to me is like pretty meaningful. But I'd say that Course Ace Open 2022 was like the turning point for me. It was my first tourney win, I think. Yeah, it was my first tourney win where I felt like genuinely useful to the team, and we were all like really happy. And for OWC, it was like my first time independently captaining. And it was pretty intimidating at first, but I got used to it, and that's why I captain for a lot of teams now.
Yeah, 2022 was a lot of fun. I think that one went to tiebreaker and a
bracket
grand
reset.
finals reset. Yeah. Well, moving on to focus a little bit more on this Course Ace closed. I know you mentioned you're a little bit nervous about Malashevsky coming to this tournament, but you seeded 4th this year, after seeding 7th last year. You did place 3rd both times. Congratulations. But what are your kind of expectations coming to the tournament? Aside from Malashevsky this course, was there anyone were you worried about? Where were you kind of expecting to place coming into it?
I mean, I kind of just had a mindset of whatever happens will happens. For quals, I'm surprised I even got top 5 because I felt like I kind of underperformed some picks, but I guess the pool's just that hard. And for matches, I think I was pretty nervous against Zudi at first, and then it eased in a little bit once it was like getting more decisive.
Do you generally go into a tournament and look at the bracket and go, okay, I can win this tournament, or I can get top 3 in this tournament, or you just kind of look in the bracket and just see how it goes, hope for the best?
I mean, if I really want to push, I will just try my best to win. I feel like if I hold myself back from wanting to win, then why would I improve in the first place? So yeah,
It's
I
very
always try
true.
to beat everybody I go against.
Yeah, I want to go through a couple of your matches. So let's start off with round of 16 quarterfinals. You had a sweep 6-0 against Zudi, and then another
Ooh.
dominant 6-1 win against Flying Tuna. I mean, what was kind of your prep, your general thoughts going into that matches? How do you feel? How did you feel about them overall, in hindsight?
For the Zudi match, I was actually honestly pretty terrified because she's cracked in round of 16. My
Yeah,
last match against her was like almost a tiebreaker. It was like 1 point off. And for Tuna, I honestly was pretty confident after what happened in the Zudi match. I realized I could like pretty much play on form as long as I study the maps well enough.
yeah, Zudi's a very scary opponent in early stages. I think I remember a lot of
Yeah.
us saying in that kind of first episode that we thought Zudi was somewhat underseeded and could potentially be a pretty close match, but didn't end up being the case. Your first kind of then after that, it was semi-finals where you took, I believe, your first 1v1 win over Malashevsky 6-4. I mean, massive
Yeah.
upset. It was a really impressive performance. Talk to us about kind of what went into it, what your prep looked like, how you prepared for it, and your overall takeaways from that match.
Um, I mean, obviously it was Malachevsky, so I was like more nervous than anything compared to the other matches. But once I like eased into it, it was like I was up 4-2, I think, over a break point, and I was like,
Yeah.
okay, wait, we can just like lock in, surely. And I mean, the unfortunate DC happened, but I feel like it's not really that wasn't really the deciding factor of the match as much as I think people think it is, because the breakpoint happened and Malice banned 2 maps that I specifically did not practice. So
You knew.
yeah,
You knew.
There
but
you go.
it was.
You got away with it.
I mean, the win was pretty motivating. This happened with other players where if I just got one win, I would have like pretty good mental against them. So I will use that for the future for sure. It was a big mental boost.
Yeah, and you mentioned being nervous going into that match. Do you feel like there's almost like a T1 effect against certain players like Malashevsky or Emmerich type
Oh
players where you
yeah,
just because you feel like they're so good, you're nervous going into the match and you just play worse?
it's kind of more of me having been against them before, because every time I went against Maz or Emmerich in 1v1, it was always 7-2, 7-3. So yeah,
Yeah,
that sort of mental kind of used to overtake my mindset when I played tournaments.
yeah. So after that, you had your winners finals 7-5 against Forum. It was incredibly close. There are a lot of matches that I think were less than 50k points, but in the end didn't quite get to tiebreaker. Is there anything you would have done differently in that match? Any picks you would have changed, or were you overall pretty happy with your performance?
Performance wise, not really. I actually realized like a big problem in my form, in my like alting specifically, which is why I switched to middle index for the next
Oh,
week's match. And but like for the match, I can't really complain about the loss because form is like he's really good and he's like my inspiration for aim control. So just like I had MGC against Vaxay, I'm gonna have that same type of mental where I'm gonna use the loss to boost my mental and try to do better again.
fair enough. Wait, so if I'm understanding correctly, you changed your whole
Mhm.
tapping style for the next match?
Yeah. It
So what
kind
was your
of
tapping
hindered
style
something.
before, and then would you
I used
change
to
it
use
to?
ring index, but
Oh, okay.
I had a big problem with like my ring finger just tapping too hard naturally, and it would like
Yeah.
my it would like stretch so weird. I don't know how to explain it, but it looked
Oh,
weird.
okay.
It felt weird.
No, it's really interesting. I guess that brings us to our last match. I know we discussed this in our recap, but I'm not sure if you had any extra thoughts about the Malashevsky match this past weekend.
Uh, I'm not gonna lie. I kind of just had fun with the grand finals because I felt pretty skill capped in the pool. It was
Yeah.
9 stars. Like I couldn't do much.
This is
I
9 stars.
I mean, I was interacting with chat. I was like trying to be funny in stream instead of like. I mean, obviously I didn't throw. I tried my best though, but it was like the best way I could keep my mental in check. So I did it
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, I think it's always nice to see players have fun with it, but like still try. I think there have been cases in the past where players will just give up completely. So like
Yeah.
it's definitely important to have fun with it, and it's also nice when they're still trying. I remember you were in chat for the last podcast mentioned that you're like, yeah, I'm super skill capped on this pool. But I'm glad you had fun. I wanted to get your kind of overall thoughts on the tournament for your tournament as a whole, but also just the tournament in general. Were there any kind of tournament results that were surprising to you? Any players or matches that stood out?
I mean, with all the tournaments I've played, I'm always happy with how I perform, but I do think I could always do better. I My mindset of being complacent like before was hindering my improvement, so I kind of just dropped that. As for like other players, I was honestly excited to see Box and Taquito specifically, and they honestly did pretty good from what I've seen. I was also excited to see Window Life as well, actually. I guess pretty good. Secret all-rounder, trust.
Yeah, it was fun to see some new players, especially like up and comers that are improving very quickly, have good performances, and potentially be back next year. But to wrap up kind of our Corsairs close segment of the interview, I wanted to get your prediction on the grand finals match: Malachevsky versus Worst HR Player. Remember, if Worst HR Player wins the first match, they will have a bracket reset, and it is best of 13.
Okay, I can't really get into the specifics, but here's how Forum can win. Okay.
Let's
Okay.
go.
You see the Nomad 3, the Nomad 4, the Nomad 6, Hidden 1, Hidden 3. Those are pretty Forum favorite maps. Malice is obviously very good at them, but Forum is like a player that literally specializes in those skill sets. Same with Hard Rock 2 to 4 and Hard Rock 3. I just feel like he has a lot of pool to go for, and he's also on the winner side, which is like a really, really big mental boost for him. He and I talked after my match against him, and he said he would be more self-confident in the future, and I hope that's a deciding factor in the match. Like, his mental is really improving.
Yeah, it's good to hear because I feel like he really hasn't played much 1v1 at all, right? Because I mean, if I remember correctly,
Yeah,
he was worried about
it
getting
was only
speed
Jong's
abused.
hidden tournament.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, even coming into this tournament, I mean, everybody agreed he would be a beast on most things, but would just get speed abused. And
Yeah.
here he is fighting for top 2 anyways. So it's been a very impressive performance so far.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think it's pretty. Even if you get speed abuse, it's kind of hard to not place top 3 if you're a player like Form who's like really good at everything else. Like, for example, me, I have my speed, I have my reading, I have like all the other skill sets, but I lack Hard Rock. So there's always that player who will have like an abused skill set against them.
Yeah.
Okay, but what's the abused skill set against Malachevsky or
Malachevsky?
Emrek?
Mental game.
The abused skill set against
Terrify
Emrek is
him.
the abused skill set against Emrek is sleep schedule.
Oh yeah.
Against Malachevsky,
schedules.
it's PC crash.
True, actually. So as we move on here a little bit from Corsairs closed, I have been seeing a little bit of discussion of you talking about doing maybe making some changes. What does the future kind of look like for Enry, the Osu player, the tournament player, and whatever else? I know obviously ESSA was announced recently, so of course you are at the very least going to be hosting one tournament.
Oh yeah. Okay. Can we get into that first actually?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go for it.
So I'm hosting, as you mentioned, a speed 1v1 tournament with $1,000 prize pool. And I am pretty excited to see how that turns out because like instantly there were like 200 registrations. Well, not instantly, but obviously finally. And there are players like Colibet, Arnold, Eric, Window Life signed up. I just genuinely think it's going to be a good tournament to watch and play in as well. I hope to at least give a good playing experience for other people because I am pooling most of it alongside Rizoa.
Rizoa, my angel.
Rizoa,
So like,
Angel.
What kind of led you to decide to move into this hosting role, and does that kind of portend more staff work from you? Do you foresee like stepping
Yes.
back from tournaments to instead be moving into this staff role?
I won't necessarily be stepping back from tournaments, but I will be signing up a lot less because it. I think recently tournaments have felt more like an obligation, and you don't want that, do you?
Sure.
But I have decided this already. I will not be playing OSU World Cup this year.
Ooh,
There's
You'll
a
hear it
lot of
heard it here
reasons,
first.
but I will be
Breaking
applying
news.
for tester and probably mapper if I can.
Lord knows they could use. I feel like every tournament can always use like late stage speed players and just late stage skill
Yeah.
level players. So
especially.
I mean,
testers.
playtesting is at that for that level of skill is super valuable.
Yeah.
The obligation thing is interesting. So would you say that tournaments have kind of over the last year or two? Obviously, you've played a lot, so it's sort of turned into maybe a little bit like I'm going to play this tournament because people are telling me I should. Is that sort of the takeaway, or?
It's kind of just like an obligation to perform always, which is like really nerve-wracking for me. And like coming into closed, I had like it's a pretty big tournament, so obviously everybody's gonna watch you. It was kind of overwhelming for my first time in closed. Obviously, it settled in a little bit. It was still there. Like I was still pretty overwhelmed by community support and other stuff like that.
Is that a little bit as well why you liked to spend so much time, like shit posting, for lack of a better word, in Twitch chat and stuff, is to kind of help alleviate some of the
Yeah,
nerves and
I
things?
mean, I kind of just like chatting in most chats. It's pretty, specifically full circle. It's always chill to just like watch you guys talk about tournaments. I really like the stuff you guys do here.
Oh, that's awesome. We appreciate hearing that.
too.
Thank you for that. Now, so if enry, the 100% full-time 10-20 tournaments a weekend era is kind of behind us a little bit, looking back over the past few years of yourself as an incredible presence in the tournament scene, what would you take away as maybe your favorite or your best memory of the last couple years that you've spent playing tournaments so actively?
Memory wise, I would still say Corsairs Open 2022. Like our team was genuinely just so happy over winning that. The team VC was really loud. We were supposed to play games, but it was really late for Emrek and I, so we just didn't. But I still talk to that team pretty frequently, and we're probably gonna run it back for Open 2024.
Emrek will be. I don't know. We'll see.
Emrek is not playing team tournaments.
Yeah,
But
that's what I heard.
Yeah.
we have some new people. I also
Okay.
some people that I've met through the tennis scene were also like, that's like something I'm genuinely grateful for, because some players I talk to pretty often are like the Gaten, Takedo, Zuri, Xylus, and I don't think I would have been as close with them as I was now if it weren't for having teamed up with them in tournaments. It's kind of crazy how much just a circle game can do.
Yeah, you meet so many cool people through playing
Yeah.
staffing tournaments that you can be friends with for a long time afterwards.
It's actually crazy. Like, I know I'm still friends with people that I met in my earliest days in like 2017.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, there's like two things left that I want to touch on at least. Real quick, OWC 2023 Philippines. The name collab aside, it seemed like that was a team that had a really great atmosphere and made a really great run. Any thoughts on how that went for you guys and what you all took away from that? Because I think Philippines' run last year was really fun to watch, even though as a commentator it was pain.
Yeah. I mean, aside from the names, it was like, it was both, it was like pretty bittersweet, but 90% of it was meaningful because obviously I mentioned my first time forming a tournament roster and it working like pretty well. And one specific rookie I added to the team, Imposter, was like really hard grinding after OWC, and that kind of inspired me and made me pretty happy to see. As for the future, I don't know what's gonna happen for Philippines and OWC, but I wish them the best. Seriously.
Well,
And
at least we can hope for
yeah.
normal names.
It's
Oh,
gonna
yeah,
be
us,
normal names
us in
now.
the caster booth. Let us call people by their actual names.
Let us not suffer.
And
It's
just
a
the last
one-time thing. We promise.
just the last thing that I have here. You've kind of been identified a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Whether a speed player, a reading player, a hidden tech player, 1v1 player, team player, captain. What do you think, if you were to have the choice of what you would be most remembered by other people for, how do you think of your own legacy so far?
I mean, inevitably, there's just gonna be people in the community who have their own standards and interpretations of what skill sets they find more impressive than others. So, I'd just be more than happy to be, like, simply an inspiration to someone, whether it be for, like, speed tech or reading or just, like, whatever I do.
I think that's really that's a really good mindset. I think it's a really good way of looking
Yeah.
at it. For me, that is all the questions I have. iFlame, anything else you would like to ask our guest while he is here?
I mean, I think that's pretty much it for me as well. Enry, was there kind of anything else you wanted to add? Anything you wanted to say to the viewers, or just anything you wanted to shout out as we close out the interview?
Not really. I think that's it.
All right. Well,
Thank you guys
huge
for having
thank
me.
you. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on and doing the interview. Once again, huge congratulations on the third place for the second year in a row, and looking
you.
forward to seeing what you do in future tournaments, whether it be playing or staffing. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's going to be all. I think, again, yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to come on, and look forward to seeing how things go in ESSA as well, because I think that that should be a very fun one.
Thank you.
But that will do it. Again, big thank you, big shout out to Enry. You can see his socials here on the screen, where to check him out, where to follow him. I know he streams a lot on Twitch, following on Twitter, YouTube, etc. as well. We'll look forward to seeing what he has in store for us next, as iFlame said, whether it is to be as a player or as a staffer. And next up, we are going to say goodbye to iFlame. We're going to welcome back in Dio here in just a second. And we are going to welcome our next interview of today. It is going to be none other than Miles himself. You all should hopefully know him either as a tournament player or a commentator, or more importantly, right at the moment, a map pooler for Course Ace Closed. So good afternoon, Miles, and welcome to the podcast for your first appearance as an interviewee instead of as a panel member.
Hey, what's up? So, I'm in a new location, so obviously this adds to the effect a little bit, not the usual background, so makes me feel a little more different than usual.
It looks very nicely put together, very well organized. So we like that. We like that background. So for people who may not be as familiar, Miles, of course, was and is a longtime tournament player. Give us just a little run through. We've got USC from last year on the screen here for a couple minutes, but little run through on maybe your history as a tournament player, since that's really where you got your start.
Well, yeah, and I feel my identity as both a pooler and a commentator both stem from my time as being a tournament player. And like you mentioned earlier, I was also a victim of the OWC 2015 USA pipeline. I feel like everyone who stayed up for that match got just the infinite motivation to put themselves completely into the tournament scene, and that was me included. That was 8.5 years ago. I was like 13 or something. I was like, oh my god, I would kill to be on this stage. And that just motivated me to go on and play a whole lot of tournaments. And that was mostly between 2016 and 2020. 2020 is when I won most of my badges, but spent a lot of time before that in low 4-digit, playing a lot of tournaments, mostly with my friends. Playing stuff like, I believe my first tournament was an SMT monthly, If anyone here was around for
Yo, SMT monthly.
Yo, that was my first tournament
Holy.
too. Let's go.
that. Yeah, those were great. Like, and another fun fact about those tournaments is that they actually still have all their VODs on YouTube. So if you played in an SMT monthly, you should go look that up because
Wait, I can find a FC on a 180 pp map from 7 years ago? That's crazy.
literally, like I played the near distant future as a tiebreaker in
Oh,
one of my
man.
first matches
Oh,
of
yeah.
all time, and I still am able to go back and watch that. It's amazing.
That's OG. Like, that's OG.
I remember playing Madoka Magica DT map that was like 4.8 stars in a 5-digit tournament back in like 2015 or 16. So I gotta find those VODs. Good to know.
Yeah. But, and then after that, I started getting a little bit more serious about it, playing a lot more high 4-digit tournaments. And one thing I'd also like to talk about for the tourney scene back then, it was a lot more insular. So basically, everyone knew everyone. So if you were in, say, Kanyo's Discord server, you can basically find a high-performing team in any 4-digit tournament and most high 3-digit tournaments as well. So that's pretty much where I started taking it a lot more seriously. I also took a few more leadership roles in the tournaments I was playing, often captaining most of my teams and being the captain for New Jersey and United States Cup for like 6 years, and then going on to USA and 4-digit World Cup for a while, even though that was technically only 1 year. But I was kind of the shadow captain for the years after that.
So from that, what was kind of your entry point going from full-time playing to also doing, you know, a decent amount of staffing, whether, you know, commentary or pooling, etc.?
That is also back on the point of how the OCU tourney community was very insular. A lot of my friends were starting to get into staffing as well. I'm friends with a lot of British people, like AJT was actually the guy who invited me to my first pooling role as a test player. It was, I think, OSU Tandem Tournament 2. It was AJT as the head pooler, and I was just kind of helping him out with that, sending him some maps, and that's where I did the first map pooling I ever did, and then mostly took test player roles after that. But then the next pooling role I took was in Kanyo Cup 2 with Kanyo, and that was the first real big project I was doing, because in Tandem Tournament, it was just kind of, you know, throw the maps on the sheet, AJT will be like, yeah, this is good, or no, this is not. But Kanyo Cup 2, anyone who knows Kanyo, that guy is serious about his map pooling, and that was my first time seeing like a sheet with a really cool like formula. And I remember, you know how you usually put the link in and then it autofills? Yeah, no, I was used to manually typing out the song title.
The good old days.
Stats. And I started typing in the map stats on my suggestion, and he was like, Miles, are you stupid?
Oh my god, that's funny. So I guess a question like slightly related to that is you basically just went from playing tournaments right into map pooling then, like no commentary, no reffing, none of the other stuff, just like straight from playing to map pooling pretty much instantly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
And it was only later when I started getting into commentary, because it was actually UT1G. It was probably in UFRJD. You were like, hey, anyone want to commentate USC? And that always felt like my tournament. And I was like, you know, I really like map pooling. I really like playing tournaments. I feel like I could talk about them too.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up becoming a whole nother thing in itself. And that was really awesome.
USC is like the pipeline, bro. I swear.
It really is.
I love you. I love USC because it's like there's there's a lot of matches, so it's just like, you want to commentate? Yeah, sure. Like, especially in the earlier years when it was a lot less formal.
Mm-hmm. Oh my god. Some of the older clips in USC with just like people screaming in the commentator box, like that's just old time OSU tournaments there.
The quorum commentary era is unparalleled, actually.
Dude, people in this era would not be able to handle quorum commentary.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So I guess kind of jumping off the same question, right? You had like, from my point of view and from I think a lot of tournament staff point of view, a different pipeline into staffing than a lot of other people, right? A lot of people will kind of say, okay, I want to help out with tournaments, and they'll go into reffing or they'll go into commentary or streaming first, and then they'll, after more experience with it, work up to pooling. How do you think that the way that well, actually, first of all, which of those do you think is better, or is there a better way compared to like being a tournament player first and then doing a lot of pooling and then getting into other stuff, or just like trying to help out with staffing instantly? Let's start there for now.
I think it really just depends on your OSU background in general. Like, say you're a player with not a lot of playing experience, like say you're a 6-digit or even lower than that, you could be in the millions in ranking, but you want to help out with OSU tournaments, the easiest entry point would definitely be to get into reffing. That's just kind of your way to get your foot in the door. You can ref without much real OSU specific knowledge. But say if you're a top player who wants to get into staffing, I know we were just talking to Enry about that earlier. Like, we're actually already talking with Enry about potentially joining us on the map pooling staff for closed next year, because I know we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but if you are, say, a high 4-digit, even a high 5-digit these days, those guys are kind of cracked too, or like a top player, like if you've been playing tournaments for a while, you have a lot of applicable knowledge that you can put instantly into a pooling team, into a test playing team, and like a diversity of opinions, at least on pooling teams where I'm active on. Like, I always like to bring in new people, hear new voices. Like, I feel like if you're an experienced player, it's very much the easiest path to get in on the test playing side, because every tournament now needs test players. Like, that's a role that didn't really exist like 5 years ago, but
No, it didn't.
Now everyone wants test players. So if you're willing to put in the effort and share your honest feedback on a map pool, like, I definitely would recommend getting into test playing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is also the reason why people who have the communication skills to be able to explain what they're thinking about in terms of, tournaments, map pools, matches. When you already have that gameplay experience, it's very easy to get into commentary as well, right? Very similar to map pooling, but in terms of, how do you think about a map pool as a player versus a staffer? How do you think about how the match should go? All that kind of stuff. So I'm of a pretty similar mind there. And then this is the next point anyway, Aaron, unless you have more stuff to add on how Miles got into staffing and pooling.
Nah, by all means.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about your pooling philosophy, like as a past player and a test player, and I feel like this is a good segue into it. Like, how does your tournament experience in a lot of mostly 4-digit, right? Like, there's been some open rank tournaments that you played. There's been like Hippo Cup and stuff, but that was before Hippo Cup was open rank. It was still kind of rank restricted. How does that experience impact your pools and the way that you structure map pools, how you think about pooling philosophy, that sort of stuff?
Well, I mean, I think this is a really interesting question, because you see people who are also like former high-level players coming out on both sides when it comes to pooling philosophy. Like, you have people who try to strive towards this sort of like ideal perfection when it comes to map pooling, and then you have people who like to pool more playfully, more fun, I guess. Like, you can make sacrifices in order to have more fun, even if it means maybe a slightly lopsided difficulty balance or a slightly lopsided skill set balance. And I have a whole bunch of notes right here about pooling philosophy stuff, but I think the biggest thing specifically from coming out of the playing side is that I very much value maps being, I guess, like, fun and playable is the thing. Like, when we really started getting into the slot meta, where I think most harshly you can say mappers and map poolers were trying to make up skill sets for the purpose of being balanced in a map pool, I prefer maps that are just like completely fun and playable, and I would rather play a map that is like maybe not as good, maybe slightly more lopsided in terms of skill set, than something that's just like, very mono skill set. Like, I think the best example of that is when Nomad 6 started coming around and everyone started trying to like make up these finger control maps, like quote unquote finger control. And it was like these types of maps didn't really exist. It was just Devious Panda when he made, I think it was Piano X Forte. That map was the tipping point, because that map is so good. But then everyone was like, oh my God, this is so good. We need to make this 100 more times and put this in every single map pool.
Yeah,
the fake music Nomad 6 like artificially generated like procedurally generated rhythm change songs era is just like the most depressing part of Osu's map pooling history, I swear.
I feel like some similar things happen with slots that don't really need the procedurally generated rhythm. Like a lot of map pools are kind of constrained in that way, where it's both a thing of player expectations and map pooler expectations. That there's some stuff that's always there, right? Like there's always an anti-mod free mod, or there's always a stamina no mod pick, or there's always something that's like pure aim and hard rock, right? So I guess a lot of what your pooling philosophy and the things that you have tried as a pooler is more focused on kind of just more well-rounded maps almost. So how do you kind of balance the expectations of the player base for what a pool generally is with that sort of pooling philosophy? Because I feel like there is a line to walk in a lot of tournaments, and I kind of have to do the same thing myself when I'm pooling, right? Like there's your own thoughts on what a pool should be, or what this map pool in this round of this tournament in particular should look like, and the expectations of the people playing it or the people watching the tournament as to generally what a pool looks like. So how do you kind of balance those with your philosophy in particular?
This is kind of a tough one to answer, because part of me just wants to go on the whole like Dada USC 2022 spiel where it's like, oh, a map pool is a collection of maps, slot pooling has poisoned the well, and people have forgotten why slot pooling exists and stuff like that, which is kind of true. But when it comes to like, I think expectations, like player side versus pooler side, I think it's pretty important to like step back a little bit, just think, a pool is just a collection of maps. I think there are very tangible things that you can evaluate about a map pool, such as like the difficulty balance, the skill set balance, and the map specific things. Like if a map has like an unsnap note, that just sucks. Like you can't argue yourself out of that if you're a pooler. But there's also a lot of intangible things about map pools as well. And I mentioned that earlier. Things like music choice, fun maps, or hype maps, which we're going to touch on later. And I think I try to tread the middle when it comes to that. I know a lot of my fellow poolers will try to go out there, but me specifically as a pooler is kind of a funny thing, because I'm not usually the head pooler, so I'm not usually in a position to share my thoughts too much about this. But I think it's especially apparent when looking at the closed pools, where you see a lot of maps that are very much out there in terms of like, maybe how crazy the map pool is. Like say in quarterfinals, we have Deconstruction Star and Nomad. And then most of the rest of the Nomad pool is just very stock standard, like AIM map Nomad 1, Embraced by the Flame Nomad 2, Nuge Nomad 4, like stuff like that. And I think the way that I try to do it is by thinking about map pooling as a slot pooler. However, when you put in a map that deviates from the slots, you're able to make up for it in other slots. And I like to call this flex slots. I don't know if I'm deviating too much from your question here, Dio, but
All good.
I feel like I'm kind of monologuing a bit, but
That's the whole point. I mean, that's why we ask the questions. We want to hear the answers.
Yep.
True. But map pooling is just this really funny pseudoscience where people tried to perfect it with slot pooling a few years ago, and we ended up figuring out that was boring and the wrong thing to do. But now we're kind of in this little era of chaos where like people are experimenting with new things. You have like Dada and USC, and that's eventually going to be translated to OWC, by the way. But like everyone is trying to like keep balance while also bringing back interesting picks. And what I like to call this method is modified slot pooling, where you have your skill sets, you can view it down like it's a slot pool, but when you put in a map that deviates from it because, say, it's fun or hype or you just want to pool it, you could just make up those skill sets somewhere else. Like, say I make Nomad 2 a flow aim alt map, and I'm now missing a map that has a tapping requirement somewhere else. then maybe for something like the Hard Rock 4 or Hard Rock 3, you can make that a stream map because you're missing the stream map that was in Nomad 2. And that's why I call it flex, because you can kind of be a little bit creative with it.
It's very similar to slot pooling, right? It's just that you don't necessarily need the exact same slots every single week in every map pool to do the same thing. You just need to keep the overall same or similar skill sets in a pool, and playing with where those are and how those are represented gives a lot more interesting sorts of map pools than just the same exact slots in the same exact, places in the map pool every single week.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a really good example of this in one of the closed pools, actually. I'm going to pull this up really quick.
We can actually just get into that, because that was the next part of the segment.
Oh, hell yeah, let's go.
Yeah, so, and I mean, obviously you can kind of branch here to suit, what your thoughts were just then, but, thinking about this philosophy of your kind of flex pooling, and the time you've spent developing this philosophy, between last year, this year, kind of what are your thoughts on, for example, 2022 and previous, or 2023, I mean, in previous Corsair's closed pools versus kind of what you've developed them into now using this philosophy that you've been discussing with us?
One thing I think last year is that last year it was kind of impossible to apply much philosophy at all in that pool, because this is kind of a touchy point, I think, for Corsair in general, because, Corsair has this big identity of using a whole lot of custom maps. And last year we had a ton of customs. Like, I think it was at least like 30 or 40 customs last year. And one thing about customs, like, I think abstract views about, like, whether customs are even worth doing or not aside, like, when you have a lot of custom maps, it's harder to, as a pooler, direct the map pool in the way you want to do without being, like, overly aggressive with a mapper. Like, say you have a very specific view of what you want for a map, but you can't, like, just oppress that vision onto a mapper. Like, say, I'll use an example in chat, actually. We've got Gordon up there in the chat. Say I'm a pooler and I want my hidden 3 to be flow aim with a little bit of finger control in there, but also a tangible reading aspect with, like, some funny overlaps or something. That is so overly specific. Like, suddenly you have to find a song that fits that. You have to, like, have people looking at that map to make sure that it fits what that is, while also, like, just modding it as a map in general. And that's really hard. That takes a lot of manpower.
For comparison's sake, just to give an example here, pooling Perennial right now, out of all the custom maps that we have, which is something like 30, 40, I can think of one that fits the skill set that you're talking about. A single map out of all of them that we have from all the customs. So yeah, that is incredibly specific, just to put it in perspective.
So it's really hard to guide customs into your philosophy as a map pooler, when a lot of the times the customs end up becoming the philosophy. And that's something that I think there's only a few people in this game who can really do that extremely well. One of them being Half Slashed, who isn't really too involved anymore. That guy was the reason why Corsair's Open was able to become that identity of being the custom tournament. It's because he was putting in all the work required to make sure every map fit into the philosophy. And that's something that our pooling team last year didn't necessarily have. And that is the biggest difference from this year. Basically, this year's pools were almost extremely reactionary to last year's, in that, oh my god, we are, like, completely traumatized from just having too many customs and not knowing how to properly deal with them. And, like, yeah, a lot of them ended up fine. I think a lot of them were very good maps on their own. It just felt like in the map pools they were a little bit misguided. And that's nothing... I don't think you could fault that to anyone in particular. It's not my fault. It's not any of the QA's fault. It's none of the mappers' fault. We just, as a pooling staff, didn't really have the infrastructure to do exactly what we wanted with every custom. And that's why this year, customs were toned down a lot. Like, we had maybe a dozen customs total, maybe a little more than that. And basically what happened is we had our own philosophy be based off of existing maps, and then we were not specific at all with where the customs landed. Like, there were, I think, over half the customs were intended to be in one round, but they ended up going to another just because we thought it fit more in that round. And that's pretty much, I think, the major difference between this year and last year.
Do you think, I guess I'll put it this way. What do you think were your biggest successes this year with the pools? And maybe if there were any, do you think there were any particular failures that you would like to, be able to improve or iterate on going forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure every single Corsair's Closed player in the chat knows the failures already.
I know. Yeah.
I talk about that in CC participants a lot, but the biggest failures from this year were balancing in difficulty. And that's something that I knew would be hard from the start, but I didn't foresee to be as hard as it actually was. Like, one thing that is just consistent throughout the tournament is all the reading maps are fucking impossible. And then
I feel like that's every year, no? That's just like
yeah,
every
it's always been
Closed.
Corsair's Closed. Yeah, looking back at the Nomad 6s from the last year, dude, those maps are always stupid. It's like, enjoy your 120k, bro.
Yeah.
Literally. All the reading maps are impossible, and then the speed maps for the first half of the tournament are easy. So it's like, I completely understand where players like Ciccone are getting angry from, because you have players like Forum having maps that they can always win no matter what instantly in the tournament. Yet players like enri and Ciccone, like these speed specialist players, are able to they aren't able to win their own skill set consistently.
Yeah.
Like, because everyone is able to play Senseless Massacre somehow. And I fault that a lot to star rating. I could also fault that to myself. But that's one thing that is going to be fixed when we bring a player like Enry onto the pooling team next year, because he is one of the few players in the game that can probably actually balance those skill sets against each other with things like aim and stuff as well.
I think that's a thing that's a big struggle for a lot of open rank tournaments in general. Like, even OWC last year struggled with some of the reading picks just being too hard for the round, and a lot of the speed picks early just being, completely super easy, right? The average score on the DT picks early on in the tournament, and like if it's a round of 32 tournament up to quarterfinals, or if it's round of 16 up to maybe semifinals, is always, if it's 44, like 3.6 to 4 million team score, right? Which is just unthinkable for any other pick in the pool. So I guess this is less off of closed pools and more just like a general pooling idea thing. But how do you think we balance that? Because I feel like a lot of those speed picks are actually as hard as a lot of the, for example, like aim mechanics picks in the pool, right? But a lot of times it's just so easy that everyone can play it, and that's sometimes a function of the difficulty of the pool. So how do you try to balance the difficulty there with the perceived difficulty, like the objective difficulty with star rating and comparisons to other maps, versus the perceived difficulty via statistics, which then it's just too goddamn easy?
Yeah. First off, the reading maps in OWC being too hard, that's something I can actually point a finger at someone for. That's Dada's fault. Dada, if you're watching this, this is your fault, Dada.
Dada.
Remember that Yosei take Goku map? Remember that
Dada. Get him in here to defend himself,
that
bro.
Shit was too hard.
Oh my
I told
God.
him every single day, Dada, this map is too hard. We're gonna have to nerf this. And he's like, no, it's fine, it's fine.
Oh my God.
And then everyone in the tournament shits the bed on it, and I'm like, well, how about that? And then Hinorin's Relation of Misfortune, that map had like some follow point alt patterns during the slower parts.
Yeah.
And I had to like fight like tooth and nail to get that shit nerfed.
Oh man.
And then it did, and then the map got so much better, but okay. But now onto the actual question. Speed being too easy. That is the hardest thing to balance in the game, because, there's a lot of conflicting viewpoints on this, I've found. Like, there's a lot of people who are like, well, you have to pool for the player base and say say if the player base of Course Ace Closed has 10 players who can play this level of speed, and then you balance that against a reading map where, say, only Forum can play that level of reading, then you probably have to nerf either one, buff the speed to the level of the reading map in terms of perceived difficulty, or nerf the reading map down. And a lot of times it's really tough to judge just where that ends up. You know, for speed, at least we have star rating in its favor, where we know, okay, if we're making a 7.5 star pool, we know our speed is going to be somewhere around the ballpark of 8 stars, because so much of star rating has just been towards balancing speed. But there are so many other things to take into account for when you're pooling a skill set like speed. Like, you know, there's, you know, burst speed, finger control, stamina requirement, and some of those things will check all the boxes, and then other things won't.
And some of those are affected by star rating changes, and some of them are not. And
Exactly.
So figuring out, you know, which ones are overstarred versus understarred, and yeah.
But yeah, it's like, I think the only good approach to solving that problem requires actually to have a top player who can play every round of the tournament on your pooling team to judge those against each other, because I think I was pretty okay at Osu when I was good at it. I think I'm still okay at it, but like,
Yeah, all right.
can I judge a fucking 8.5 star speed map against a 7.2 star reading map? No, I was dog shit at those skill sets.
Yep.
I was always dog shit at those skill sets. Like,
But funny how the two hardest skill sets to balance in the entire game are the two things we both suck at. No, like that's just great. That's just fantastic for us. I love that for us.
So it's like, it's just, every pooler has like a different perception of it. Like, obviously, using OWC as the example again, like Dada, who was a reading player, mind you, when he was a tourney player, thought that those AR8 hiddens in OWC weren't too difficult. So he felt fine having that, but he wasn't the best speed player. So when the speed maps were way too easy, it just ended up having that same issue where the reading was too hard, speed was too easy, because his perception of that is that when it's a little bit flawed. And that's why you need to have, every pooling team needs an enry to sanity check you when you're trying to balance.
So much easier said than done to find somebody like that.
Yeah, it's impossible. So we just have to make do. Like, that's just something that's gonna suck, and until more top players become poolers, it will continue to suck.
It's kind of in that interesting. I don't know if you guys saw this discussion that Digital Hypno posted on Reddit the other day, but I'd seen some of the questions that he asked previously, and one of them was really along these lines, where when you're making a pool, you know, do you balance it so that enry gets 600k on the speed map and Forum gets 600k on the reading map, or do you balance it so that I don't know, Nineric gets 200k on the reading map and Forum gets 200k on the speed map? Like, how do you balance for the scores you want to get? And I feel like that's just like the ongoing challenge, especially with those particular two skill sets.
Yeah, it's one where there's no winning answer to that doesn't just take so much, like, just, it almost feels like nitpicking. It almost feels like just stupid, because I feel like in the year 2024, Osu should have better ways to, like, objectively skill difficulty for maps. But, like, when you get to this star rating for Course Ace Closed, it's just really tough to do that. I think, especially for reading, I think, is the bigger issue than speed. I feel like the speed maps, even though people were getting really good scores on the speed maps, like that one is just more tough to balance, because, you know, it's the meta skill set. Everyone at this point knows how to mash speed. Everyone at this point has tried playing a speed map if you're a top player. Everyone tries to get good at that skill set. But reading, on the other hand, you have zero incentive to get good at that skill set by any metric of the game, unless you're trying to dominate it in tournaments, or you're someone who just gets satisfaction going for those types of scores. But those players usually don't try hard to get good at tournaments.
Yeah.
I have one. Sorry, I guess Dio, if you wanted to go real quick.
Go ahead.
I have like one, kind of extant map pool question before, whatever Dio is want to ask, or before we go forward. But so this year, I think the pools, as a spectator, not a pool or commentator, I think the pools did a good job of including some maps that were known and were hype. You had like Deconstruction Star, you had Furiosa Melodia, stuff like that. And yet, at the same time, it feels like players, much more so than people watching or playing in other roles, have a big issue with this sort of thing, right? There's always these concerns of, oh, this map is too known, oh, this map is overused. What's kind of your take on this particular argument? Because as the pooler here, obviously, in a tournament like Closed, where it's kind of content-based, you were clearly fine with doing some of those content picks. But in a more grand scheme, what is your kind of thought on that particular debate?
I'd usually agree with the player side on that debate because, the one conversation I had about this was with Decaton, who was pissed at me for pooling Deconstruction Star because he's mental blocked. And that is a completely fair point. Although I think that's something that a lot of poolers tend to brush aside, like, oh, just unmental block yourself, lol.
Yeah, that's skill issue, sorry.
I understand being mental blocked on that, and, that's something that doesn't happen in less content-based tournaments that I pool. Like, say, in OWC, we'll only pool, like, one or two Poggers maps per pool, and then the rest are going to be, like, still good maps, but, like, maybe just not so overtly, like, content, like, filling the veins of the map. But it's another tough argument, but I probably side with the players on this one.
Fair.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. I feel like there's also some players who just don't care and are just, happy to play whatever. But there's definitely some players also who enjoy it and some players who really hate it. So it's tough to pick a correct answer.
Mm-hmm. I understand Decaton in his argument because I think the match he lost on Deconstruction Star was like 6-4, and with a normal alt map, he might have been able to squeak that one out. But, that's the price we pay for content. GG, go next.
So moving on from like general pooling thoughts, we've talked about this year's closed pools quite a lot. Were there any in particular that you wanted to like talk about with respect to pooling philosophy or successes and failures in the pools, like, or more just like general shout out to any of the pools?
I think my favorite pool this year was round of 16. And that's it's for some weird reasons. It's where I feel like the concept of flex pooling was applied the most in this pool. Like, every single map that has an overlapping skill set with one another has like very distinct differences. Like, for example, all of the tech picks in that pool, Nomad 4, which was Ryu Sagan, Hidden 3, which was Internet Yamaro, and then Hard Rock 3, which was Do You Love Me, those maps are all vastly different. Like, Ryu Sagan being almost on the gimmicky side, being almost CS5, having these awkward long sliders, lots of aim control. Hidden 3 being a mech tech kind of aim map, and then Hard Rock 3 being lots of aim control and finger control. Like, I just think that this round of 16 pool is the one that fit together almost the most cohesively. But then there were also some other problems with this pool, such as basically every single test player told me the Nomad 2 was shit. And every single player told me the Nomad 6 was too hard for the round. And that the HR1 was mistimed. But
every HR1 is always mistimed if you listen to certain players, so I don't even know about that one anymore.
I guess. And then obviously I think I have to bow down and admit the biggest oversights in the whole map pools for the tournament. Like, Senseless Massacre in quarterfinals, I'm sorry. Crimsonic Dimension DT2 in that round was too hard, but that was the opposite problem. That's a speed map being too hard, which ended up being welcome in comparison, because I still believe that the skill set balance for that Nomad 5 DT2 was fine. It's just the fact that you could double tap FC a DT2 or a Nomad 5.
Yeah. every time I see that map, I'm just ready
Yeah.
for the massacre afterwards. Honestly, like it's just
Hmm.
yeah.
And then after that, it's honestly, I'm not gonna guilt myself for the rest of these. Let's get on to the next question.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Favorite map in the entire tournament. If you had to pick one pick.
Favorite map in the entire tournament. That's a tough one.
I know.
Part of me wants to say a breakcore remix of the guitar solo from Fever by
Of
Leonard
course.
Skinner,
Oh my
but
god.
I might get killed for that. So I'm gonna say my favorite map in the whole tournament is probably, although this might be a weird answer, DT3 from semifinals, Jiu no Sanka. The alt map in semis, the one that had so many close points on it, the one where
Yeah.
everyone was slider breaking, but that's one of my favorite songs in the game as of late, and it played really well in the tournament. Like, so many close matches on that. It was picked in almost every match. That was one of my favorite picks.
So we talked a lot about past year closed pools. We talked a lot about this year's closed pools. What about the future of closed pools? Are you staying on for closed pooling? Are you kind of changing the direction a little bit? Are things going to mostly stay the same and refine what was done this year? What's going on?
I think it's going to be similar, but there's a few differences that need to be changed. I have them written down here. The takeaways from this year: hype is good. Gimmick needs sanity check. Speed balancing is bad. In parentheses, get enry on the pooling staff. And change slotting so we don't have 6 nomads for half the tournament and have 4 DTs for half the tournament instead. Because Nomad 5, we literally had these discussions like 2 years ago. Like, Nomad 5 speed is ass to pool.
It
and
is.
just adding the speed map into the DT pool makes it instantly easier, and the DT players like it more too. So, like, why the hell do we have Nomad speed? It should just be in the DT pool, especially with how DT3.
DT speed
So
is so
easy.
easy to
It's so
pull.
easy.
Oh my
So
god.
easy.
It's actually infinitely easier than Nomad speed to
Instead of
pull,
just pulling
like-
the same set of Nomad 5s over and over and
Dude,
over
you
and over.
don't even know. Like, it's actually the most painful part of any high star rating map pool is finding a no mod speed map. No wonder OWC did free mod speed. That shit's way easier. You just balance for hard rock.
Yeah, and for myself being on the pooling team in the future, I'm like not 100%, but I think I'll probably stick around if I still have the time, which there's nothing saying that I won't have the time next year, but I think we'll do similar, but like, we definitely learned some lessons this year. Like, there were other things I didn't touch on, like the fact how in our whole trauma from last year's custom experience, we were just completely laissez-faire with the mappers this year. Like, it was basically, there were situations where, oh my god, we forgot to ping this mapper that, like, they need to be done by this time, and it's like, we need to be more hands-on with the customs we have. And basically, other than that, it's mostly things I've already mentioned, like speed, reading, getting a top player on the pooling team. Probably want to integrate test players a little bit more, because this year, the test players, like, a lot of the time we wouldn't have the pool done until like halfway through the week, and then we wouldn't really be getting opinions on balancing issues until people were going for replays.
Yep.
And that just did not give us enough time to do anything about any issues.
I mean, sometimes it just be like that. Sometimes you get
Yeah.
behind and then you're just there for the entire tournament. That sucks. I've been there plenty of times. You said something about like laissez-faire custom mapping, and I kind of get what you mean by that, but maybe explain that for people who aren't super familiar with the custom management process and what's good about it and what's bad about it, and how you kind of find the middle ground, because there is such a thing as too much control over your customs, like we were talking about earlier with the, you know, hyper specific, I need this exact sort of skill set custom, like that just doesn't work. But if you just let things go, then sometimes it just doesn't work out that well either. So kind of explain that for people who might not be super familiar with that process.
So this caused a huge argument in the OWC pooling server a couple of years ago, by the way, about being way too hands-on with custom maps. So basically, when you're being laissez-faire about it, you basically tell a mapper you need to make this, like, i.e., I need Sing to make me an 8-star tech map for Grand Finals, which is what we asked him to do originally. And that gives him a very wide freedom to do like what he wants with the tech map. It's like, okay, I pick this song at Miles, at Aiden. Is this song good? We'll probably be like, yeah. And then he'll give us a preview point, and then we tell him if he continues or not. And then after that, it's basically, we don't see the map much until it's completely finished. And when you're being not laissez-faire or very controlling with your customs, that's when you are, say, for example, giving the mapper the song instead of having the mapper suggest songs to you and saying, I need this song mapped in this way. Can you do it for me? And then you're checking in on the mapper's progress, like every week, like at mapper, yo, I need 30% at this date, 50% at this date, finished at this date, and then hit sounded by this date. And both of those have issues, but as you said, there is like a good medium where I like to personally, at least in my ideal world, you have a mapper finish a map like themselves without being held to too hard of a time constraint. And then after that, it just goes through like a normal modding process with test plays and stuff. Like, oh, if this pattern sucks to play, then we want you to change that. If there's like map related issues stuff, then you change that. But then I think it should be on the responsibility of the pooler to then find out where that map actually fits in the context of the tournament, instead of trying to fit the context of the tournament into the map kind of thing.
All right. Well, that helps for, I think, just like generally understanding what we're talking about. But we're going to wrap up pretty soon. So a couple of other things. What are your future plans for generally staffing or with pooling in general? We were talking personally a little while ago. You're always, taking a little bit of a break after getting done with a big tournament like Corsairs Closed. But after that, what's up?
I think I'm gonna be a side pooler on a few smaller projects going forward. Like, I'm a side pooler on Ukraine's OSU tournament, even though most of the main pools are gonna be done by Rundy for that one. And otherwise, I feel like a lot of people ask me to look at very specific things in map pools and help them with that. But when it comes to being a head pooler, you can only really do that a few times a year. And for that, it's like, next big one is OWC. That one's going to be ramping up in a few months. Definitely super ready for that. But then after that, it's a big question mark. You take every year as it comes. Sometimes you get more opportunities. Sometimes you don't. Maybe next year will be the year I finally don't want to map pool or do anything in tournaments anymore. But as it looks right now, I mean, I'm still here. There's still map pools to be made. There's still matches to be commentated. So as long as I get that DM, yo, Miles want to commentate, yo, Miles want pool, maybe we'll be in.
Yeah.
He's still here, whether or not he wants to be. So you know how they always end off on Hot Ones episode. We've got cameras there, and there. Pick one. Tell it what you've got going on. Any last minute shout outs or thoughts that we have not been able to touch on already before we head out.
Shout outs Half Slashed for interviewing me after sweeping group stage in OSU Histi Cup as a DC.
Wow.
Oh, man.
I remember that.
If anyone wants to see me as a 14-year-old, you could go back to one of the oldest videos on the Core Stage YouTube channel and hear me 7 years ago gushing about winning the Pretender as tiebreaker in OHC.
I remember that TV. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. Shoutouts Dada, who will be releasing a almost 20-page dissertation about map pooling and the transition away from slot pooling any day now. I think he's rewritten it like twice already, but he's writing the big guide for like how to be a good map pooler in the year 2024. And I think anyone who's interested in going that direction should wait for that document and read it. Otherwise, that's pretty much all for me.
All right. Well, I would like to say a very deep thank you, Miles, for coming on, offering so much insight into yourself, into your thoughts on pooling, into your philosophies on pooling, and all the future. Obviously, thank you as well to DOI Flame and Enry, our other guest. Always fun to have people who are so in the know to talk to and to give all their thoughts on many different aspects of OSU tournaments. Miles' socials up on the screen for everybody to see. Follow on Twitter, Twitch, etc. But that is going to do it for us for today. As you all know, we are coming to the end of Course Ace Closed 2024. Tomorrow will be the grand finals. 13 UTC, worst HR player, Malashevsky. This one is for all the marbles. You do not want to miss out on that episode, or on that match, excuse me, on that match. And as always, thank you to everybody involved in the tournament. Thank you to everybody involved in the podcast. Thank you all for being here. And we will see you guys tomorrow morning for that match. And next week, Full Circle will be our recap and our post-mortem on Course Ace Closed, which is always a good time as we look back over the tournament that was. So we hope to see you tomorrow. Hope to see you next Friday for next Full Circle episode. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time.